Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're going to be moving lots of dahlias. There are 31 poking up so far here in the early part of April. We are in Zone 7B in Raleigh, North Carolina, and typically dahlias are hardy in the ground in zones 8 to 10. And they're native to Mexico and Central America. And folks in the colder zones can definitely grow dahlias, but typically you need to dig them out of the ground and store them for the winter time. There's lots of videos on YouTube for storing your dahlias. We're in Zone 7B in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we're able to leave them in the ground. We're near kind of downtown Raleigh, and it seems to offer a couple degrees protection, and all of our dahlias pretty reliably come up. We'll lose a couple winter over winter, but for the most part, if they survive the first winter, they're good to go. We have them on this side of our vegetable garden, and they get so tall that they actually block the view of everything else we have going on here. So we're gonna flip them from where I'm standing back over here behind me, back behind where our vegetables go, and then they'll stick up big and tall back there. But there's, again, 31 of them have poked their heads up so far, and we've got to get them out of the ground. Some of them are gonna be dividable. So I just wanna show you the process of digging these out of the ground carefully, showing you that some of them can be divided, and showing you how I'm going to get them back into the ground this morning. So here we are around the 10th of April as I'm digging these out of the ground. Our average last frost date's around April 15th. We've had a couple near frost in the last couple nights, and then it looks like in the 10-day forecast that everything is kind of past us. So I was waiting until right near the end of our potentially really cold temperatures to do this, to pop these out of the ground. There are 3 different ways in which you could end up with dahlias in your garden. You can buy tubers at box stores, garden centers, wherever you acquiring plants. You can, and they just come as we're gonna see when we dig this out of the ground, these are storing their energy in tubers like a potato, storing their energy through the winter and then using that stored energy to regrow the following spring, and they grow very vigorously and then bloom. For us, they'll start blooming in the early summer. In more northern climates, it's probably midsummer before they start to put on a lot of flowers. Another way that most of the dahlias actually that are in this garden, we started from seed. And our seeds, we grow these ones that we did from seed. They cross with one another, the bees moving pollen around out here, and then we collect the seed at the end of the season, store that, and we get surprises. We get interesting new seedlings, and we've done some from our own seeds this year as well. And then the third way is you can actually do these from cuttings. So if you have a dahlia that you really, really like, sometime in the middle of summer, you can actually take cuttings off of them, and they root really easily. You can grow that out in a container and eventually put it into the ground. Again, based on your zone. You probably would store it over the winter in colder climates and put it in that following spring. In zones 7B, 8, 9, 10, you can just go ahead and put it in that ground that first year, and should come back reliably winter over winter. So enough talk, let's pop one of these things out of the ground. I've got 5 that have popped out of the ground right in this area. Again, this energy is stored in underground tubers, and I don't want to slice those tubers with my shovel as I go in. So I really want to get back pretty far from this dahlia to make sure that I don't cut anything that I don't want to cut, and I want to get as much of the root as I can. I'm going to knock the soil off of them to show you the tubers, but I don't want to cut the tuber. This soil has been worked a lot. We actually have a clay-based soil out here, but we have put a lot of time and energy into composting and mulching this space, and now I can dig out here pretty easily. So there you go. I've gone out. Gone deep and wide, and we'll see what comes out of here. Okay. All right, so this is where we are, and I'm going to knock as much of this soil off as possible so we can go and examine this one and show you some other things we can do with it. This is an incredibly healthy clump of tubers, and when you pull one of these out, you'll notice you'll have multiple tubers. I mean, it does look kind of like a group of potatoes, how potatoes would come out of a grow bag or out of the ground when you harvest them. They're a little bit smaller, obviously, but each of these individual tubers could be individual plants. I'm not going to get that greedy. I'm just going to take, you know, one that's about this size and just probably cut it in half. You want to inspect for any soft tubers in here. So if you have some of the older ones might be in decline, and you can break those out and get rid of those completely. Make sure all the tubers are sturdy. I do this in the spring. Some places you'll read you can do this in the fall, and you would want really well drained soil if you were doing this in the fall, because I think you could potentially end up overwatering them. By loosening the soil, replanting your dahlias in the ground at that time, and then, you know, getting an extended rainy period while they weren't using any of the water, while there wasn't any new growth coming out on top of it. That's the reason I'm doing it. Plus, you can see here, when I say I have a clay-based soil, these things are sitting down in clay. And so, you know, I mean, it's really sticky red clay at the bottom of the hole. And so again, it's going to be apt to be, you know, overwatered, easily overwatered. You can not only break off one of these tubers, which I'm just going to do right now, okay? So there's an example. I just broke one off by hand. Typically we want to cut them off with a knife, but I can just have that tuber and that piece is plenty adequate. If I wanted to, I could come back in and put it in a container and grow it out for a week or so. So I'm just barely going to cover. I'm going to cover it right to where it was covered before, and I could get some roots onto that tuber for a week or two and then put that in the ground. That's the way I would do that if you were really breaking them down into small pieces. Sometimes the individual tuber will have multiple eyes on it, and you can actually slice that tuber in half like you would, again, a potato. If you were planting potatoes, sometimes you can just cut them in half. Again, I'm not going to, you know, I'm not examining them close enough really to do that. So what I wanted to do with this one clump is just take a really sharp, sterile knife and just kind of cut through the middle here and turn this into two larger chunks. And so I'm trying to go in between actual tubers, so I'm not cutting any of them in half really. Okay, and so there's one right there. You see that, how that worked out? I've got these individual pieces that may come off during this process, and they're totally plantable. If you want to try to grow those out, I would put them in a container and let them put on some new growth. But there it is right there, okay? And that's that one. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 full tubers on that. The new growth I'm not thinking all that much about, because I've got all my stored energies in that tuber, so they're fine with or without any of that new growth on them. But this will just go back in the ground at the exact same depth that it came out. So I'm going to dig out the 30 or so that I have to dig out, and then we'll start putting a couple back in the ground, and I'll show you how that goes. This is about 2/3 of them. They came out of the ground really easily. Again, we've been working on that soil for a while, and these dahlias do appreciate really kind of very rich soil with a lot of organic material, and then kind of pretty well drained as well. Again, underneath this beautiful compost that they're in is a clay base, and they've been okay with that. They're not going to root very deep in it, and it has the potential to drown them if you're just planting directly in just pure clay. So we've been mounding up a little bit of compost in between each round of vegetables in the vegetable garden, and the dahlias have been the beneficiaries of that, and they're quite happy because of that. I'm going to put these back in the ground again in an area that's been well worked over the last 3 years, and so there's again plenty of organic material. A lot of folks will tell you to fertilize these once a month or so, that they're heavy feeders. I have found that because our soil is in such good shape that I just fertilize once a year with plant tone. Is an organic fertilizer is all I'm fertilizing with. I never give them any additional fertilizer. If I was in maybe a shorter window in zone 5 or something like that, I might push them a bit harder than I do here, just because I have such a short window that maybe I get a couple extra applications of fertilizer. But for us, we just haven't had to add any additional fertilizer here. I feel kind of fortunate that way. Okay, so I showed you we can get kind of greedy and get down to just one small tuber, and if you do that, I probably would put it in a container for a week or two and just let it get some new roots on it, and then put it in the ground. A lot of them you'll find absolutely just fall apart as you're digging them out. This is one right here that I took out that on its own became 5 separate chunks of tubers. So, you know, without having to do anything to that one. And that's about the size piece that I wanted to put back in the ground, which maybe 3 individual tubers and a little bit of new growth on the top of it. Some you'll find, here's one that I took out of the ground, that if you just wiggle it like this, it comes apart very easily without having to use any kind of knife or anything like that. And then you'll see on this one, look how much, this is what I'm talking about. So down here below, I have this rotten part. I definitely want to take a sharp, clean knife, cut this off, get rid of any of that rotting material, and just leave good, firm tubers. I could take this one off completely and just replant it without any problem. Make sure any soft parts come off, and I'm going to put this back in the ground just without soft part taken off the bottom of it to make sure that rot doesn't spread into the rest of the tubers. I have one giant one, and you know, once they start to get into this size, you'll find that they're just less vigorous. So this is one of my absolute favorites. It's a spidery red dahlia that was a seed dahlia that came up from our mixing of dahlias out here, and it's been in the ground now for I think it's just 2 years in the ground, but it's grown into a really big tuber. But I noticed last year it was definitely less overall vigorous than it was maybe 2 years before that. And so again, I think it's just crowded. You know, look how crowded that is. You know, it's just giant tuber next to giant tuber. So I'm going to go in here and reduce and cut this one with the knife, get it down to 3 or 4 pieces, and then separate it so that it has a little bit more root space. But there you go. I'm going to get a couple of these in the ground now. So when they go back in the ground, I'm just putting them at the exact same height that they were. So anything that was not covered, I don't want to cover up. And so I'm putting them, again, at the exact same height. If you're buying them from the store and they're coming in a bag, you probably want about 2 inches of soil over top of the tuber. Make sure there's a pointy end where the growth was last year when you pull one out of the bag. That pointy end, you can tell where the growth was going. Make sure the pointy end goes up. Once your dahlia is back in the ground, again, at the same level that it came out, you can water it lightly and tamp the soil gently around them just to settle the soil in, but do not overwater. Water is the enemy here, especially these disturbed dahlias going back in the ground. They would be very easy to love to death. So water them to settle the soil around them, but then let them dry out as much as possible between waterings, because that, again, this underground tuber does not want to sit in any kind of water. And you can see the rot on that one that I showed you already, that I have to cut off. And again, with this clay-based soil, that can definitely be an issue. So here's a question for you. Do you like doing dahlias from seed? Have you ever tried dahlias from cuttings? What is your favorite hybrid dahlia if you have one that you've purchased at a store? And that's pretty much it. You can pop these out of the ground, divide them if you want to divide them, don't divide them, and then move them to a new location. In northern areas in the fall, you'd be pulling them back out and storing them through the winter. There's lots of videos on YouTube about that. I know Erin, the Impatient Gardener, has several videos on her channel that are quite good. She's in a much colder climate, has to store hers tubers out of the garden, and we can store our tubers in the garden. So thank you guys very much for watching and following along with the channel. We're going to have an all about dahlias video later in the season once all of these that have been dug out, divided, retransplanted, and they're showing off their flowers. And I'll go back and show you how we collect the seed and all the hybrid dahlias that we have in the garden as well. So thanks for following along.